Hello and welcome to the Scholar Progenium. Today I'm going to be talking about how we can take on the new Drukhari Codex with our Blood Angels. Now, what qualifies me to talk about this? Well, I am a Blood Angels player, but I'm also a Drukhari player. I have a great love for both of these factions, and I take both factions to tournaments, so I know how to use them in a competitive environment. Now, there's been quite a lot of kerfuffle recently about the new Drukhari Codex. There's been some data come out in the last few days talking about how Drukhari, I think they had like a 75% win stat or something like that in recent tournaments or in a recent tournament. So, are they overpowered? What's going on here? Can we take them on? Well, the first thing I would say is, as a Drukhari player, having played with the new Codex several matches, obviously outside following local restrictions, I can tell you that they are very powerful, but they are by no means unbeatable. And for me, I think the reason why there's been such a big swing in the tournament data is not because the faction is necessarily massively overpowered. I think it's very powerful, and especially compared to 8th edition codexes, it really sets the bar and separates distinctly 9th edition codexes from 8th edition codexes. There's no denying that. It's absolutely a powerful codex. It's great to be a Drukhari player right now. I can't deny that. But the Drukhari have some great flaws. They have lost a lot of their survivability just on a basic, rough percentage. They've lost about 16% just of their survivability just from losing their 6-up feel no pain across the board. And this does really take away from their survivability. And as I was going to say, I think the reason why they've been so successful is because they are so different to Marines. And of course, if you've been going to tournaments recently, then you would be taking army lists and builds that are going to be effective at taking on Marines because of the prevalence of Marines. And a Marine list, and a list that's tailored to take on Marines in a competitive setting, and people do tailor their list, it makes sense to the meta, then that is going to be a very different list to a list that's going to be optimal against Drukhari. So when the Drukhari rock up, they don't care about 2 damage stuff, they don't care about a lot of stuff, and they're just going to come at you and shred you, and if they can do it quickly enough, you're going to lose the game. And that's what they've done quite clearly recently. But the meta will shift and adapt. It's very easy to take on Drukhari and batter them, and I can tell you that myself from experience. Even if I'm not showing my opponent necessarily what I'm thinking, I can know in my head what moves they could take, which could knock me out of the game. And obviously, I keep those to myself. But the Drukhari can be beaten, and what I'll talk about today is essentially 3 different aspects you need to keep in mind when battling against Drukhari with your Blood Angels. So we'll hop right into it, and the first aspect, and sort of the most overarching aspect, is the idea that the Drukhari cannot win a battle of attrition, and they are trapped with you on that battle board, on that gaming table, 4 or 5 turns. Yes, in the fluff, they come in, they deal devastating damage, and they pull out and escape. And they do play that way and, really play into that. But the underlining fact is they can't escape until turn 5. And they are stuck with you, and you can do damage with them. And believe me, the longer the game goes on, the worse it is for the Drukhari. They really, really struggle in a battle of attrition. Excuse me. And this is an interesting sort of obstacle for the Blood Angels, because we are very much an elite army a lot of the time. And if you look at recent tournament winning lists, there's been lists using, I think there was one in February, late February, that was just a couple of Vanguard detachments. I think a patrol and a Vanguard detachment, I think, had 3 squads of 8 Sandguard. Just loads and loads of elites. There was another one that won in, I think, March-ish or early April. That, again, it was just one Vanguard detachment, which I personally don't think has enough characters in for my taste. But again, very super elite. And if we start off with a small amount of units on the board, and relying on elite forces, or then the Drukhari can pick us off piecemeal. And that brings us on to my second sort of point that you want to keep in mind, which is that don't feed your army to the Drukhari in a bite-sized fashion. And this is absolutely essential that you keep this in mind, because the Drukhari have such an ability to rapidly redeploy around the battlefield, especially on the smaller gaming mat. They can move all of their forces and shift them to one direction, and then all of their forces and shift them to another direction, and just chew through you so quickly. You can deep strike somewhere, and they can shift units back and take that unit out, and they can always, because of their speed across their units, and because of the amount of transports they have and this kind of thing, they can always reposition to optimize the damage that they want to do. And this is what makes them so nasty, because what you've got to remember is Drukhari are not a mega popular faction. They're super cool, but the Drukhari players who are out there who are going to tournaments with Drukhari, these guys know what they are doing. These are hardcore Drukhari players who've been maneuvering around the board for years, cutting Marine players up, cutting whoever they want up. So for them, this is just, they've been given a new codex, they've got years of experience, the faction's been absolutely pushed to the nth degree in terms of they've lost almost all of their resilience, but they've gained so much damage. And these guys, these tournament players, they know exactly what they're doing. They can put out the damage with their speed that they've got and not need to worry about the resilience. So if you have, if you push on to several objectives to try and maximize your primaries, they're gonna eat you alive. You've got to keep your forces, almost imagine you're in a sci-fi, horror movie, the guy who says, I think we should split up, don't listen to that guy. That guy is going to get you all killed, yeah? And that's just the case when you're fighting this sci-fi horror faction. And I'm not saying you need to castle up necessarily, but you need to remember that if you leave any portion of your forces in an area of the battlefield where there's enough Drukhari units within reach to all swarm it and take it out, whilst letting the Drukhari to carry on doing what they're going to do, what they want to do, then they are going to do that. They are going to pick that off and carry on against you, and the numbers are going to stack against you, and they'll kill you very quickly in the first couple of turns. So it's absolutely essential that you don't allow units or groups of units to be isolated where they can't be defended, where you can't bring reinforcements in. And that, remember, if they're coming at you, a really big bonus for the Blood Angels is we are good at counter assaults, and a counter assault for the Drukhari is not necessarily where they want to be. They have stratagems which let them pull out in their turn and move and shoot. Pull out in their turn and shoot and charge again, and they can do one or both. And it's a really nasty thing. It's called cruel deception, and it truly is a cruel deception. And it's really useful for the Drukhari. So they can hit you, they can shoot you, charge you, and then if they can survive the turn, they will pull out, reposition, and carry on wreaking havoc. So if you see a nasty unit get into combat, there's a good chance that Drukhari player is chancing it to try and keep them alive. They'll spend a CP. It's gone down to 1 CP for the Drukhari to be -1 to hit, because that is perceived as now not as good because of the amount of terrain that gives you -1 to hit. But believe me, when it's 1 CP, it is absolutely value for money, and the Drukhari are going to spam that as much as possible. And if they've got a really high value critical unit engaged with you, they're going to be spamming that to make it -1 to hit. It's stuff you've got to watch out for. So when you get the chance to take a Drukhari unit out, you have to seize that chance. So you're never fighting in piecemeal, and you're capitalizing when they're engaged with you. You need to mob them and take that chunk out, okay? Whilst keeping your forces together so that they can't, pick you off. And this takes me on to my sort of third piece of advice, sort of the mindset that you need to keep when you're fighting the Drukhari is, and it kind of takes me back to my first sort of overall idea, which was that, they're trapped with you for 5 turns. But the idea is that you can score big against Drukhari in the late game if you focus on taking them out in the early game. Fight fire with fire is very much a good bit of advice against Drukhari. Don't worry about, I've got to get my units onto there, I've got to have more objectives than them. If they want to outrun you on the objectives, they're going to do that because of the mobility. They're going to have more primaries than you if that's the way they want to play the game. There's nothing you can do to stop that, okay? They're faster than you, they're more mobile. There is just, you can't beat them on that. So don't try, okay? What you need to do as a Blood Angels player is focus on hitting units that are going to do the most damage to you. Yeah, you need to take them out, because what they're doing is they're hitting you as hard as they can to the point where you can't stop them. You don't have enough. They're so what I'm trying to say is they're so flimsy that even a small amount of damage output can really shatter their forces very quickly. So it's absolutely critical to the Drukhari player to take out your best damage dealing units as quickly as possible. But we can keep, a couple of units in our back pocket. Now we can bring down turn 2, bring down turn 3, and that is exactly not what the Drukhari player wants you to do. So although I've said, focus all units in, although I've said, keep your units together and supported, don't have isolated units, and, stick and focus in on the Drukhari when you can. A little bit of a counter to this advice, but it's not. These sort of three ideas have to work all together. Is that we need to use our elite deep striking and fast moving jetpack units that can reposition rapidly, and we need to get them onto the battlefield safely and into the position, and hit the Drukhari as hard as possible, and we need to give them a real 1-2 punch in turn 2 and turn 3. And each punch needs to sort of shatter a chunk of the Drukhari forces in a significant way that prevents them from doing what they want to do, which is continuously remaneuver, reposition, and focus their damage in, to a fine razor's edge. And that's what you need to prevent them from doing. So you need to constantly be clogging them up. They can only pull one unit out, even if you think, I'm going to be sacrificing this unit and I'm going to be getting them killed off. Occasionally it's worth slinging a unit and just tying them down because they can't pull both units out. It's going to stop them repositioning onto objectives, stuff like that. You need to bog them down and tie them down, and then use our ability as Blood Angels to reposition and hit them harder, reinforce our positions. And then once we've done this and we've shattered the Drukhari forces, then we of course have the ability to reposition as well, just as, not as well as the Drukhari, but in the late game, pound for pound, our units will be so much more survivable. They'll have so fewer units, and each of those units will be so, even though they'll be nasty and damage output in their own right, it won't add up to enough to take down the Blood Angels necessarily. So it sort of really swings back in our favour, and that's when we spread out, start scoring our points, that kind of thing. So it really is a defensive and counter-defensive game, and counter-attacking game for the first couple of turns until turn 3. And then once you've done that, then it's time to spread out, then it's time to score. You may not win by that many points, but you will win that game. And we have the ability to rack up points. And when you're picking secondaries, think about this. Think about the fact that you're going to need to be killing off chunks of the Drukhari in the early game, and you'll have much more freedom, absolutely massive amounts of freedom if you can make it through to turn 4 and 5, and how you're going to score the points. And think about your point distribution and your sort of victory point curve, so to speak, and what secondaries you're picking in light of that. So I know this is not like me getting a tape measure out and talking about stats and numbers and this kind of thing, but I think the psychology of a game is a massive part of it. And no precise battle plan ever survives first contact with the enemy, but having a broad, having experience and having an idea of how to beat the opponent, and knowing your opponent is half the battle, so to speak. So with our Blood Angel, we need to, in summary, we need to play to our strengths. We need to play to our manoeuvrability. We need to rely on the fact that we are more resilient than them, and we are not too different to the Drukhari in any way at all. You know, we're both fast moving, we're both extremely hard hitting, but whereas they edge us out on speed, we massively have an advantage on survivability. And if you force the game to not allow them to take advantage of their increased speed and get them bogged down fighting you, and then rely on that survivability, then over the course of the game you are just going to take victory. That's just the way it works. So I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you found this video entertaining. This has been the Scholar Progenium. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.